This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. In Season 2 of The Devil Within, we covered the tragic case of the alleged possession of an Englishman named Michael Taylor. The events leading up to the brutal, animalistic murder of his wife and dog can largely be attributed to a religious cult of personality, a jilted would-be lover, and ultimately, some terrible decisions by local clergy, including a rush to judgment that what was ailing Mr. Taylor could be blamed on more than 40 demons that had taken over his body. An outrageous and ultimately botched exorcism attempt left Mr. Taylor beaten and demoralized, and according to The Exorcist, still possessed by some pretty gnarly demons. But still, they sent him home to rest before they intended to finish the job later that same evening, and that was when Michael Taylor snapped. One of the avenues of investigation in Season 2 had to do with the massive spike in the reported cases of demonic possession that occurred beginning in late 1973 and continued for a handful of years. Why then? What happened in December of 1973? What led to hundreds, even thousands of people calling their churches, insisting that they themselves or a loved one had been invaded by Satan? Incredibly, it could all be traced back to a blockbuster film called The Exorcist.
I fainted like 10 minutes after the first beginning of the movie.
God, I was so scared when the bed was shaking and I her back. And then when her voice changed, my God, I've never seen anything like it.
It just scared me to death. Things just like this really scared me to death. I'm just nervous.
Do you remember what particular scene it was that
When she was in, what was it? When she was in a room, the doctors came in, and I guess it was when she was talking the devil's voice. Oh God, I can't believe it.
The grossest thing I've ever seen. It's weird. She turned her head around.
Why don't you just step outside?
She turned her head around. I passed out.
Based on the best-selling novel by William Peter Blatty, the movie was directed by the late, great William Friedkin and would redefine the horror genre. Much like Spielberg's masterpiece Jaws made everyone scared to swim in the ocean, The Exorcist had the effect of giving people the idea that demonic possession was possible, and also very likely afflicting them at that very moment. Blatty's novel was loosely based on a true story, or I should say, an alleged true story from the year 1949 that involved a 14-year-old boy from St. Louis that was supposedly possessed by a demon. And the church agreed, sending 2 Jesuits to perform an exorcism. This case was explored in an earlier episode of The Devil Within entitled The Possession of Roland Doe. It's available in my back catalog wherever you get your podcasts. So we have a popular novel that became a runaway hit film that went on to influence the general public in a way that incited a wave of false cases of demonic possession that had the Catholic Church on their heels for a few years, although they did issue a statement that exorcism was, and remains, a Catholic rite, albeit an exceedingly rare occurrence. But what about the movie itself? Amidst all the fanfare in the months that followed the film's release, that transitioned immediately into the tsunami of negative press involving all the possession cases, what was lost was the string of tragic events that plagued the actual production of the film, including destructive fires, deaths, maimings. I mean, things got so bad, an exorcist was called in to the set of The Exorcist. Welcome back to The Devil Within. You're listening to Exorcise This. Despite the story being based on a boy from St. Louis, Blatty changed some things around, and we wound up with a story about a girl from Washington, D.C. It turns out Blatty was an English major studying at our nation's capital when his professor mentioned the St. Louis possession case, and Blatty was struck with inspiration. While he was writing the book, he often took breaks and went to the movies, and it was during one of these outings that he watched the masterpiece crime drama, The French Connection, also directed by William Friedkin. That movie would go on to win Best Picture and Best Director for Friedkin at the 1972 Academy Awards. The following year, Blatty's book would get published.
I was doing a press tour just before the opening of The French Connection, and I received a package from William Peter Blatty. I opened it, and there is the manuscript of The Exorcist. And I started to read it, and I read the whole thing that night. And so I called Blatty, and he told me that it was based on a true story, that his novel had just appeared, and he had sold the rights to Warner Brothers, and he wanted to know if I'd be interested in directing it. And I said, absolutely. I would absolutely love to do this.
Billy Friedkin, I had heard that he was a prize-winning documentary filmmaker. I thought, my God, that's what I want. This story is so wild for the greater public.
Given Friedkin's value at the time, he was, after all, considered one of the finest directors in the world. A deal was quickly made, and the film adaptation of The Exorcist was a go. And the problem started right away. The movie opens in the Iraqi desert with Max von Sydow's character, Father Marin, encountering a fragment of a statue that bears the face of the demon Pazazu, a character created by Blatty for the novel. Pazazu was supposedly a wind demon from Mesopotamian mythology. This is the demon that would possess the young girl in the movie. And yes, given Friedkin's status as an Academy Award winner, the production was allowed to actually film in northern Iraq. The deal was that local Iraqis would be hired and trained in the latest filmmaking techniques, as well as being given extensive training on the newest equipment on the market. Friedkin and company held up their end of the bargain, but when it came time to leave, the Iraqi government decided to hold on to more than $50,000 in equipment that was previously owned by Warner Brothers. They stole it. And that was just the beginning of what would become a production that many say was cursed. The film, as mentioned, is set in Washington, D.C., but through the magic of movies, the production actually occurred on a soundstage in New York City. The stage was massive enough that the entire house where the movie takes place was constructed inside the stage, thereby allowing production to create whatever type of environment they chose, regardless of what was happening outside. Day or night, cloudy, rainy, windy, streetlights or sunshine, you name it. But then, just as shooting was about to begin, there was a fire, and the entire house burned down inside the soundstage. The stage itself was fine, but everything needed to be rebuilt, and the shooting in New York was delayed by 6 weeks. Years later, director William Friedkin was quoted as saying, "We were plagued by strange and sinister things from the beginning. It is simply the hardest thing I've ever done in my life." When filming finally began, it was only a week later that actor Max von Sydow received word that his brother had died, and he needed to return to Sweden to be with his family and make arrangements for the funeral. And that resulted in additional delays. Not long after Sydow's return, the young actor playing the lead role of Regan, Linda Blair, lost her grandfather, and production was again forced to shut down while she and her family attended services. In an interview in 1998, 25 years after the movie came out, actor Ellen Burstyn, who played the part of the mom of the possessed girl, claimed that, in all, 9 people died during the filming of The Exorcist, including a night watchman employed by the studio who was assigned to the Exorcist set. Then, an assistant camera operator suffered the terrible tragedy of losing a newborn baby who failed to survive a difficult and terrifically problematic birth. And the actor Jack McGowan, a young man of 54 who appeared in the film as the character Burke Dennings, died mere weeks after he finished filming his scenes for the movie. His cause of death was complications related to influenza, and he would die while a guest at the Algonquin Hotel in New York City. The actor Vasiliki Maliaros, who played the mother of one of the priests that actually dies in the movie, died during the filming of the movie in an eerie art imitating life turn of events. Not convinced of the film's cursed status, von Sydow would concede years later that when you're involved with making a movie for almost a year, there are bound to be tragedies that occur within the large group of people gathered for the common purpose of filmmaking. But yes, 9 is a lot. Beyond the tragic deaths, there were also several severe injuries suffered by crew members. A terrible mishap in the wood shop, where sets were constantly being built and repaired. A carpenter, working on the table saw, mistakenly sliced off his own thumb. Another crew member, part of the lighting and electrical crew, was standing beneath a large spotlight that somehow shook loose and fell directly onto his foot, causing his big toe to become completely severed from his foot. The toe was crushed so horribly that it was impossible to reattach. If you're familiar with the movie, then you're very aware of the bedroom scenes, where Regan, possessed by Pazuzu, is having a very difficult time on the bed. Her hands and feet are lashed to the bedposts, and she's having these crazy convulsions as Pazuzu takes complete control of the little girl's body. The maniacal thrashing around by young Regan was aided and drastically increased by the use of a hidden harness around the actor's torso attached to wires, where strong men from the special effects department would yank her from side to side during the particularly violent possession scenes. During all this, the actor, Linda Blair, was required to, act. Sometimes like a demon from hell, other times like a scared little girl who didn't understand what was happening to her. And even at 12 years old, Linda Blair was a pro. So during one of the violent thrashing around scenes, no one noticed that she was actually injured by the harness. Her back was painfully tweaked to the point where she was yelling, "Stop! Stop! It hurts! Please stop!" Tears streaming down her face. You can imagine Friedkin watching this on his monitor and thinking to himself, "Damn, this little girl can act." No way he was going to yell cut until he got every single ounce of performance that this actor could give him. It went on way too long. But when he finally did yell cut, poor Linda Blair just kept on crying and begging for help. Everyone was like, "Is she getting all method on us? Is she really still into the scene?" Everyone kind of hoped. No, her back was mangled to the point it became a lifelong struggle with scoliosis for Blair. Needless to say, they used the harness sparingly after that, for Linda Blair at least. The main problem with this was that her begging and pleading and screams of pain almost exactly mirrored what the character was supposed to be saying in the script. So, good writing, I guess? The mom, Ellen Burstyn, had a few harness scenes as well. Namely the scene where she gets the shit slapped out of her by Pazuzu as her daughter Regan, to make the effect seem strangely realistic, meaning to make a 12-year-old slap seem like a powerful strike from a demon that would send a fully grown adult flying across the room. They put Burstyn in a harness, again attached to a hidden wire, and again used those strong dudes from special effects to do their best to watch the kid slap mommy. Then they would yank on that hidden wire, really, really hard, and Ellen Burstyn would fly backwards as if she were hit by a Mack truck. And when you know it, one time these overzealous FX guys yanked too hard and completely tweaked Burstyn's back. She went flying into a piece of furniture and actually fractured her tailbone. So pretty soon, the entire production was whispering about how the set was cursed, and people were openly worried that they might be the next victim of some random accident. And as you can imagine, morale sank to a very low level, and people began to leave to work on other, less accident-prone productions. If these defections continued, it could endanger the entire production. Something had to be done. But what? Always the charismatic leader, William Friedkin stepped up and said he had the solution. In the weeks before filming began, Friedkin got in touch with a priest from the Archdiocese of New York named Father Thomas Birmingham. Father Thomas would join the crew as a consultant for all things Catholic during the filming, and Friedkin wondered, might he also act as our personal exorcist? There were whisperings that Pazuzu was actually real, and that he had taken control of the set and was responsible for all the terrible things that were happening. It's interesting to consider that a full year before the movie came out and affected the movie-going public in a way that led an inordinate amount of them, both religious and non-religious, to believe that demonic possession was real and was probably happening to them. A full year before that, the subject matter and the skill with which the story was being told had the same effect on the people making the movie. Because of the movie, they felt that the movie was possessed. Father Birmingham, however, didn't share their concern. What did scare Father Birmingham was the possible fallout if he did perform the exorcism. The anxiety from the believers, the confusion from the non-believers, and the question of, well, let's say a Mesopotamian wind devil has actually shown up and is killing people. Is finishing a movie worth dying for? Of course not. Besides, after a clandestine investigation of the claims of demonic interference, Father Thomas concluded that no such interference was occurring or had occurred. To Friedkin's dismay, his request was denied. Oh, how William Friedkin would have loved to have been able to tell his friends in the business that his movie was so intense, his actor's performance is so real, that it required a fucking exorcism just to get the demons out of the way so he could finish filming. But alas, he had to settle for Father Thomas offering to personally bless every person on set. Everyone accepted. And believe it or not, the rest of the shooting went off without a hitch. The film was originally released in just 30 theaters on the day after Christmas in 1973. Very quickly, the movie broke records every day of its original run and was expanded to more than 330 theaters nationwide and remained in theatrical release for more than 2 years. 2 years! Movies are lucky to get 2 weeks nowadays. It remained the highest grossing Christmas release until Titanic surpassed it in 1997, 24 years later. The Exorcist remains in second place in that category. When all was said and done, The Exorcist was the top grossing film of 1973, and with gross earnings adjusted for inflation topping $1 billion, it's the highest grossing horror film of all time and number 9 on the list of highest grossing films of all time. And if you could ask William Friedkin what he really thinks about all this movie was cursed business, he'd probably flash that devilish grin and admit that it was all a marketing scheme to get more people into theaters. He was, after all, the loudest voice back then, claiming that supernatural forces were standing in the way of his art. And no one stood in the way of William Friedkin's art. William Friedkin died of pneumonia last summer on August 7th, 2023. He was 87 years old. Thanks for listening. Be sure you're following The Devil Within wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can also check out our socials at The Devil Within Pod on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time, stay safe out there. The Devil Within is a Cloud 10 Media production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. Written and produced by Brandon Morgan. Executive produced by Sim Sarna. Our post-production supervisor is Bruce Whitkin, who also provided original music for this episode. For The Devil Within, I'm your host, Brandon Morgan.